Its share price has recently moved to fresh all-time highs, but are the earnings about to put a dent in Apple's performance? Hello, I'm David Jones. I've been a technical analyst for 25 years in financial markets, and this is our YouTube channel dedicated to individual US stocks. I thought we'd take a look at Apple. We've got their earnings due out at the end of October. Clearly, always closely watched. We've recently seen the share price move out to its best levels ever. So before we get into the earnings in a bit more detail, we'll catch up with what's been going on with them lately. We'll have a look at the chart and I'll come back and talk about the earnings in a bit more depth. Of course, if you're watching this and you're not subscribed, if you click on subscribe, support the channel, and we can continue to push out content like this. But let's have a quick look at what's been going on with the Apple shares this year. Let's have a quick catch up with what's been happening with Apple over the last couple of months. Then I'll talk a bit more about the numbers. Then we'll come back, look at this in a lot more detail and look at maybe where the opportunities could be. These are the last earnings. We go back to the end of July 2019. The share price was around about 212. Earnings came out. It did slip early August below 200 back towards 192. But since then, it's just surged higher again. You know, at the time of recording, the market had closed at 236. Yes, we are overbought. If you look at the RSI down here, it's just pushed into overbought. The last time we were overbought was just over a month ago, back in September. But it's a trend that's still strong. To put this into perspective, let's just zoom out. The previous all-time high was back in October 2018. Up around 233, so we've punched out through those. That trend is still strong. Can it still hang on to it in earnings? Let's talk about earnings details in a bit more depth. Then we'll come back onto this and look at things and try and identify maybe where the opportunity is. So that move was just at the end of last week to all-time highs, and we've got these earnings coming out in a couple of weeks' time. But let's just rewind and take a look at the last set of earnings from back in July. So back then the market was expecting earnings per share of around about $2.10. Apple actually over-delivered. They came in with earnings of $2.18 a share, so that was a pleasant surprise for the market. Market analysts were expecting sales revenue of about $53.4 billion for Apple for the quarter. Again, they came in better than expected with sales of $53.8 billion. We've seen how important services have become over recent years, and that's very true, of course, with Apple. For the first time since 2012, iPhone revenue was less than 50% of total revenue, coming in at 48%. Of course, clearly being propped up and surpassed by the services side of Apple's business. So that services revenue, subscriptions, Apple Store fees, cloud storage subscriptions, all this sort of stuff, that was up 13%. So looking ahead to the earnings at the end of this month, it's not just about the earnings per share. Of course, we had the launch of the latest group of iPhone, the iPhone 11, back in September. There's rumored to be strong demand for China for this, although apparently it is struggling somewhat in the USA. Those services numbers, we saw strong growth in the last quarter. They are going to be closely watched as they continue to be such an important part of Apple's overall sales. Then, of course, in November, Apple TV Plus starts properly. Its streaming service. We'll see next time around in those earnings what sort of impact it's had. Let's look at some of the big levels to watch for Apple. Because we're up at all-time highs, up at around about $236 at the time of recording, there's nothing in the way of previous highs to look at. So I think we're really just plucking out psychological levels from 300, 275 down to 250. You know, these could well be barriers if we see a bit more growth. Where it gets a bit more interesting is on the downside. You know, we've only seen it pop out to a fresh all-time high for one day so far. If we see it sell off, where do we need to see the buyers come back in? First of all, I think the big level to watch, the low for October so far, about $20 or so away from where we are now, and that's at $215 a share. If we saw a deeper sell-off, there's a really interesting level to watch, and I think it's a pretty critical one for the run we've seen in this year for Apple, and it's down around about $190 a share. We've seen plenty of lows set over recent months down here, so a deeper sell-off for Apple, that's the area to watch. But let's see how these levels play out on the chart. Let's take a look at Apple in a bit more detail. Let's start out with that break to all-time highs. I'm a big fan of breakouts. If we see a big level broken for a market, whatever market it is, it's normally, or it can be, a suggestion that perhaps a new trend is underway. We are only one day into this breakout, so let's not get too carried away. I think what's going to be interesting now is what happens next. Do we see the market dip back and then push out again and confirm the breakout? Maybe we'll see some nervous trading ahead of these earnings. But I think it's going to be a really interesting couple of weeks, the running up to the earnings and really how the share performs afterwards. But it is extending the trend for 2019. Let's just pick up on that. We've seen this general upswing this year. Let's have a look at that in a bit more detail. So this is where we are. That trend has been chugging along since the beginning of the year. Okay, it's perhaps not the most valid trend line in the world. We normally need 3 tests of a trend line. I suppose you could argue at a push, the move in August back towards 190 was another test of that trend line. For now, the trend line's coming in just below $200. So for me, any weakness in the Apple share price at the moment, still looks like a buying opportunity. I think on the longer term chart, on this daily chart we're looking at here, I think it's only if we start to break through sort of 190, those lows from just before the last set of earnings to the lows from June of this year, does it start to look as if that trend is in trouble. I suppose more aggressive stops, if we're looking at other places for support on the chart, we have the old lows around about 215 from October, but it's a trend that still appears to be strong. We've got a 20-day moving average on here. The price, as you can see, last moved above the 20-day just at the beginning of October. The 20-day moving average coming in around about 222, 223 at the moment. Yes, the price is overbought on the RSI. Of course, it's not surprising for a strong market, to go overbought and stay overbought for some time if that trend is still strong. We only have to look back to sort of March this year when we had an overbought RSI, but the market carried on going up. The same again in April. So what have we got? The first thing is the break through this trend line. This resistance, these old highs, is a big deal. I'd be quite tempted just to sit on my hands now and see what happens. How much follow through do we get if we sell off? How deep does it sell off? But for me, perhaps the perfect trade or the perfect opportunity to buy here, if we saw the price under some pressure following this breakout and then some support come back in, some buying come back in, look to be a buyer then, assuming we're going to go back and retest and push through that old breakout level. But as I say, on the downside, I think only 190, only if it breaks 190, does it start to look as if the trend for this year is in trouble. So with the earnings still maybe a couple of weeks away, the price performance of Apple is strong, and this is, at the moment, it's only the first move, but it's a strong move on the daily chart, that breakout to fresh all-time highs. So that's it. It's early days for that breakout, but these are traditionally seen as positive. What's going to be critical is if we do see the share price sell off, do we see buyers come back in to push the shares back out again through the breakout level? Plus, of course, those earnings in a couple of weeks' time are going to be really closely watched. We'll come back after the earnings have come out and update the outlook for Apple, taking a look at the charts. To never miss out on our regular content on US stocks, make sure you're subscribed and click the alarm bell thing down there, and you get a message off YouTube every time we upload new content. But for this update on Apple ahead of its earnings, we'll leave it there. So from me, David Jones, good luck with your trading.